Chapter 4. Osak cut off communications with his parents over the circumcision issue. He refused to take their calls and never made any calls to them. He made up his mind to give up his right of succession to the traditional stool of his hometown his family had held onto since the community was founded by Uwa and Iken. He was proud of his direct lineage to both historical figures, but he loved his wife and daughter and was not going to succumb to a cultural practice that could destroy his marriage to the woman he loved. Ambivalence got the best of him at times, such that he would fleetingly think about going forward with the circumcision, as grotesque as it would be if he could keep his princely status and succeed his father to the throne. The wound would heal after all. But his main worry was his beloved wife and the hurt the issue would create in their relationship, for he was dead sure that the matter would create an irreparable rift in their marriage. Maybe Ingrid could be warmed up to the idea by watching a documentary with her to gauge her reaction, he thought. It was a crazy idea, but there was no harm in trying it out. At this point, Felicia was 9 months old, just 3 months shy of the 1-year deadline his mother had given him to have her circumcised. There were no rental outlets that had a documentary film on female genital mutilation, and so Osak turned to YouTube, where he searched and found a documentary and an African-themed film on it. He copied both films and burned them on CD-ROMs. The days went by as they still adjusted to the routine of dealing with a new baby. Ingrid was fully back at work now after her maternity leave. Care for Felicia was a challenge, as it was nationwide for young professional couples like them. They could afford a nanny, but they were also afraid of nanny abuses, which were frequently reported in the news lately. Ingrid worked out a deal with her parents, whereby she and Osak dropped off Felicia with Eunice, who babysat her until she was picked up again in the late evening. Eunice's duties at the restaurant she owned with her husband were taken up by an extra hire whose salary was paid by Ingrid and Osak. Eunice changed her hours at the restaurant to reflect the deal and only worked there on weekends when Felicia was cared for by her parents. The arrangement was punishing in the context of the mileage they covered each day. At 6 a.m. every morning from Monday to Friday, they drove for 30 minutes, at times up to an hour, depending on the crush of rush hour traffic, to Arlington, Virginia, to drop off Felicia. Then drove through the notorious Northern Virginia traffic into Washington, D.C., to their respective offices for work. At about 5 p.m., they headed south into Virginia to pick up Felicia before spending another hour on the Interstate Expressway to get home. It was exhausting, but they would have it no other way to get the top-class babysitting care their daughter deserved. Felicia turned 10 months. On a week, Ingrid's employers informed her about a legal secretary's conference they wanted her to attend in Colorado. She would be away for a week. Osak and Felicia would be alone during the period. Ingrid thought about asking her mother to move in during her 1-week absence from home, but decided against the idea. On the eve of her departure for the conference, as she spent a quiet Sunday afternoon with Osak, he asked her to watch a documentary film with him. Osak had set up a private TV room in the basement when they had moved in, and had installed a large plasma TV on the wall. There were plush sofas and lacquered coffee tables in the red carpeted room. The walls were painted purple, Ingrid's favorite color. Osak opened up a bottle of champagne and served Ingrid fresh popcorn. He slotted a CD-ROM on which had been burned a documentary into a DVD player, pushed the play button, and sat next to Ingrid to watch the film. A nondescript shack in a slum out of a developing country was the first image to come into view. A young woman was shown in tears, while a baby's loud cries were heard behind a curtain where a circumcision was presumably going on. The sobbing woman was the mother of the crying child. Minutes later, she was seen being interviewed. "Why were you sobbing?" they asked her. "Because my daughter was going through a very painful thing that will cause her to lose a lot of blood, and I was feeling for her." "But why did you agree to it?" she was asked. "Because it is something in our culture we have always done to girls, so I had no choice but to agree to it." "Do you support this practice?" she was asked. "No, I do not like it at all, but I can't by myself challenge the practice. I am only a woman. I don't have any voice in things like this about our culture. It is the men who decide." How many women do you know that have the same feelings as you do about this practice? Some women support it, but most women I know here in our village are against it. Some girls have died from this practice. Osak spied Ingrid's countenance from the corner of his eyes as the film rolled on, and Ingrid's taut and chagrined face was clear, even in the slightly darkened room. Ingrid was clearly in distress as the images were shown on the TV screen. "This is awful," Ingrid let out after having seen too much, including several more minutes of howling babies, interviews with adult women who had been circumcised as kids, and interviews with the men who did the circumcision, and the nonsensical reasons they gave for the practice. They were all old men, and this enraged Ingrid further. She then became curious about Osak's interest in the documentary. "What is the purpose of this film?" she asked him. "Why did you screen it?" "I just wanted us to watch it, to be informed about the cruel practice, and to appreciate the great American civilization we are living in right now, which will never tolerate such a practice." "I have heard about female genital mutilation before," said Ingrid. "I always thought that it was awful, but this is my first time seeing a documentary on it." From Ingrid's reaction to the documentary, Osak did not think she could bear watching the featured film on the subject burned into the second CD-ROM he had wanted to screen, and so he cancelled showing it. Osak's general assessment of the situation after watching the film with Ingrid was never to suggest to her that Felicia be put through the procedure. The case was therefore closed on the issue. as far as he was concerned. His parents could apply pressure on him as much as they wanted, but he would continue to ignore them. Ingrid and Osak ate an early dinner, after which Ingrid went to bed early. She was scheduled to leave for her conference by a morning flight, and she wanted a full night's rest. Ingrid was up early the next morning to prepare for her trip to Colorado. By 7 a.m., she was seated in the front passenger seat of Osak's car, and Felicia was in her car seat, strapped to a rear passenger seat. Osak pulled out of the garage shortly after 7:15 a.m. for the 1-hour drive to the Baltimore Washington International Airport for Ingrid's 10 a.m. flight. "I'll miss the two of you." "We'll miss you too," said Osak, driving. Osak kept up with the speed of traffic on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway towards the airport. Ingrid was relaxed during the ride, except for a short period of time when her mind had wandered to the documentary they had seen the previous night. The harrowing experiences of the screaming babies behind the dirty curtains and their sobbing mothers had bothered her sleep, and she hadn't slept well. Why such cruelty over stupid beliefs, she wondered. One particular statement from one of the old men infuriated her. Asked by the filmmaker what the purpose was for the practice, the old man had answered that the practice was necessary to curb the sexual urges of females. As the clitoris was the source of those urges and sexual pleasure, there was need to cut it off. There would be too many promiscuous women walking around with excited clitorises if circumcisions were not performed, the old man had stated further with a flourish. What arrant bullshit, Ingrid had thought of the statement. To another question posed to the old man, Ingrid had now started to hate with a passion. Even though she probably would never ever meet him in person, the old man had answered it in the same atrociously condescending manner towards women. The question was why men were entitled to sexual pleasure if they deprived women of the same by removing a part of the flesh which gave them sexual pleasure. Shouldn't sexual pleasure be a mutual thing? The old man was asked, and he answered that women were created to give birth, not to derive sexual pleasure from sex. Only males had a right to pleasure. I want to grab his thin neck and wring it around until it's broken, Ingrid whispered to herself, furious. She asked Osak, "Do you remember what that scraggly and unkempt old man said in that documentary yesterday?" "What part of his statement do you ask of?" "Where he carried on about why only men were entitled to sexual pleasure and women becoming loose if uncircumcised?" Ingrid clarified. "Oh yes, now I remember. What about that statement? Do you agree with that?" she asked Osak. "Of course I do not." "That film appeared to have been shot in Africa. Is that the belief over there among most of the men? And is this a widespread practice over there?" she asked. "No and no," he replied. "That circumciser is evil and should roast in hell for all the physical and psychological damage he has caused the girls he put under his barbaric knife," said Ingrid in condemnation. "He probably has been doing this all his life. Can you imagine the thousands he has scarred for life?" Osak had no reaction to her statement. but it was strongly clear from Ingrid's railing against the circumciser that the issue was a no-go area. Osak maintained the speed of traffic as they neared the departure terminal, where several vehicles were lined up, dropping off travelers. He came to a stop, and they both stepped out of the car. Osak retrieved Ingrid's suitcase from the trunk and handed it to her. She spent a couple of minutes caressing Felicia, who had fallen asleep in her car seat. She tarried for a few minutes to make light talk with Osak. There was still an hour of time left before her flight's departure. Finally, she had to go. Be well, take good care of Felicia. I will see you in a week's time. Safe journey, and please call when you arrive, he told her. They kissed one last time, and she turned around and walked into the terminal. Ingrid's travel for her work was the first time they would be apart since they were married a little over 3 years ago. Osak didn't anticipate being lonesome, as he had his daughter with him, who would need his full attention. He decided he would work from home for half of the time Ingrid would be gone, and that way spend more time with Felicia. It was a good balance until Ingrid's return. Barbara would run the office, doing routine tasks and managing his client's schedule. He returned home from the airport and within an hour found himself sorely missing Ingrid already. Ingrid arrived at her Colorado destination by the early afternoon and checked into a hotel. She next called Osak to inform him of her arrival. He placed Felicia's face next to his phone so her baby sounds could be heard by Ingrid, who was excited and tried to talk to her. Hi, sweetheart, she spoke into the phone to Felicia's baby sounds. Sweetheart, I hope she is fine. Have you given her food? She asked Osak. She is great. She just ate, and she ate a lot. Well, I just got to the hotel literally minutes ago. There is a meet and greet later this evening. I think I will skip that and get some rest before the first day of the conference tomorrow. It's a good idea. Better be refreshed before the main thing tomorrow, said Osak in encouragement. They chatted on the phone for another half hour until Ingrid asked to break off so she could take her rest. He also had some work to do in his home office. Osak worked for several hours in his home office preparing audits and other financial documents for his clients. He was tired by about 9 p.m. and decided to close up. He bathed Felicia, changed her diapers, fed her again, and put her to bed. He then made himself a meatloaf dinner, drank a can of Coke, and retired for the night. Osak was asleep for several hours when he suddenly woke up in a rough and sweaty nightmare. He was about to be stabbed in the dream, but he had willed himself to open his eyes, simultaneous with him shouting at the top of his voice. Drenched in night sweat, he sat up and tried to make sense of the dream in which an old woman, unimaginably tall, at over 9 feet tall, with a glowing red face and eyes that shone like stars, had told him she was Felicia and that he should get on with the reincarnation rite in his ancestral hometown, or she would return to the realm of the ancestors. She disappeared immediately after speaking those words and was replaced by a large man who lunged at Osak with a knife. That was what had stirred Osak to get up, shouting. Osak was frightened to no end by the dream. He rarely had nightmares. The last time he had an awful dream like that was in high school, when his maternal grandmother had died in a dream, although she was still alive in actuality. His father had attributed the dream to malaria when Osak had told him about it. He certainly had no malaria last night to have experienced this latest nightmare, and it disturbed his mind greatly. He continually looked over his shoulders and around to make sure that the strange old woman in the dream was not lurking around somewhere in the bedroom. The old woman's admonition about a reincarnation rite his parents had previously told him about flummoxed him a great deal. The correlation was amazing and appeared supernatural. His parents had warned him about Uwa returning to where she had come from if he did not comply with their directives. This warning seemed to connote the possible death of Felicia. Now the old woman had repeated the same thing, and this made Osak to fear for Felicia's life. He hurried to where she lay in her crib and touched her face to make sure she was still alive. She was indeed still breathing and soundly asleep. Osak heaved a sigh of relief, then returned to his bed, where he sat up again for several hours, unable to fall asleep again. He remained in this state until it was mercifully daylight again and the start of a new day. Osak started the new day still mightily worried about the dream and what it portended. Were the words of the old woman and the man who tried to stab him revelations of terrible things about to occur in his life? He was ambivalent about the dreams being a foreteller of events in the future of a person's life. But in light of the conversations he'd had with his parents surrounding Felicia, he was unnerved by this dream. The nightmare he had in high school involving his maternal grandmother came to mind again. Although his dead maternal grandmother, in quotes, in that dream was incongruous with reality, in the sense that she was still a living person when he had woken up, and even went on to live for another 20 years, he could recall one or two dreams which did correspond to worldly reality, particularly the one in which he had failed a crucial test required for his college admission in America. That test, called Test of English as a Foreign Language for Foreign Students, was required of all prospective foreign students to pass before admission by American colleges. He had studied hard for it, but he failed to pass it in the dream and in reality. He was compelled to retake it. Osak checked up on Felicia, who was wide awake now and uncomfortable because her diapers were wet. He changed her, gave her a quick bath, and made her food. The phone rang, and it was Ingrid who was calling to check up on them. They spoke for several minutes before Ingrid had to disengage to attend her first presentation. The phone rang again, just as he had hung up with Ingrid. And it was Eunice on the other end. "Hi, Osak," she greeted. "Good morning, Madam Eunice. How are you?" "I'm well. How is my grandbaby?" "She is fine and very bubbly this morning." "That's good. Can you bring her over at least for one day before Ingrid gets back?" "Sure. When do you want me to do that?" "Ingrid gets back next Monday. You can bring her over this coming weekend and pick her up on Sunday," said Eunice. "That will work. I'll see you then." "Thank you, Osak. Take care." "Thank you, Madam Eunice." Osak went back to tending to Felicia, changing her clothes and propping her up on a high seat in his office. He then turned on his computer to start the day's work. It was a Tuesday, and he was working from home. He struggled to concentrate, but that dream wouldn't go away from his mind, spooking him even further. Earlier in the morning, when he looked in the mirror as he shaved, was an image of a woman in a halo standing behind him. He turned around to look, but found no one there. He thought he was hallucinating, but the eerie scene occurred again. Again, he looked behind him, and the image was gone. Felicia's baby noises were pleasant to his ears. His melancholy was soothed by them. The paradox of the joy he derived from her presence, yet her whole being and existence causing him distress, was strange. He thought it was unfair. Reaching for his cell phone, he tapped on Ovu's phone number. Ovu picked up and greeted. "Hello, Osak. How have you been, my friend?" "Terrible," said Osak in a pained voice. "What's going on?" "I had this really awful dream last night, and this morning another terrifying incident occurred while I was shaving. I've tried to make a meaning of them, but my fright is not letting my brain process properly." Osak told Ovu the nightmarish details of what had happened to him in the last several hours, and asked Ovu about what he thought he should make of them. Ovu started off by reminding Osak of the advice he had given him on the circumcision issue. He was convinced that the dream and the vision of the woman in the bathroom were revelations from the supernatural world to Osak to comply with the directives his parents had given him about his daughter's circumcision and her reincarnation rite. "I have no doubt that the old woman you saw in that dream was Uwa, and her message to you in that dream was to present Felicia for the reincarnation rite back home, and to comply with everything else our traditions require to be done about her, including her circumcision," said Uvu. "The vision you saw was probably her again, projecting to you her insistence for you to proceed with what she had told you in the dream without delay." "Ovu, I cannot do this without irreparably harming my marriage to the woman I truly love. Why am I presented this dreadful choice of either my daughter or my wife in order for me to live my life happily? It's not fair." "Osak, you are a prince of the kingdom. Your life is not the same as that of commoners in a community like me. But I can recommend a radical way of dealing with this matter without any harm to your marriage. Please tell me, what is it?" "You can manufacture a ruse that separates your wife and you for about a week or so, during which you would have custody of Felicia. You will then fly her out of the country for the circumcision and the reincarnation rite and fly right back after." "Ovu, what you have detailed here is wild and not feasible. There is no way 1 week will be enough for all of this. Felicia's wound from this circumcision will take longer than a week to heal, and Ingrid will find out. The separation ruse can be planned to last for more than 2 weeks then," said Ovu. "Ingrid will still find out about the missing clitoris." "Her finding out is no big deal," Ovu retorted. "If she asks about it, you can tell her you don't know what happened to it. It could have atrophied as a natural occurrence." Osak found Ovu's fantastic plan intriguing, but he also thought that the component about flying Felicia out of the country would be difficult to do. He could construct a ruse that would allow him to be alone with Felicia. It could even occur during a professional trip out of town by Ingrid, but when that would occur and everything else being perfectly in place was anyone's guess. Uzukwu helped him to fine-tune the plan in the course of 2 hours of discussion. Osak promised to get back to him as needed as he tried to put the plan together. The week went by slowly until it was weekend again. Osak looked forward to Ingrid's return in the next couple of days on Monday. It was a Saturday, and he called Eunice to make sure he could still bring Felicia over as had been discussed earlier in the week. Eunice was still fine with it. Osak took Felicia to her grandmother later in the afternoon. Ronald was at the restaurant. Eunice, who was home alone, was delighted to see her son-in-law and granddaughter. When Ingrid had first brought Osak to her and Ronald, she had been open-minded about their daughter's interracial relationship, unlike her husband, who acted coldly towards Osak. Ingrid became distressed about it as the relationship blossomed. But Eunice's counsel and support soothed her mind. Osak, too, sensed the tension on that first day and felt ill at ease inside the home. He feared for his life, perhaps irrationally. An aspect of American culture he knew very well growing up back home, particularly when he started reading voraciously about America, was gun violence. He thought Ronald would shoot him. And so midway through the visit, he had asked to speak to Ingrid just outside the house. There he told her his concern and his desire to leave immediately. Ingrid was appalled and scolded him for the first time for sounding alarmist. Yes, she had also detected the poisonous chemistry between her dad and Osak, but thoughts of murder in Osak's head was going too far, and she assured him there was no chance in hell it would happen. Here now with his daughter to visit with Eunice, he briefly recalled the tension on that first visit a few years ago, which had perturbed him. "What can I offer you?" Eunice asked. "There is beer, juice, and soft drinks." As Osak handed Felicia to her. "Orange juice will be fine," said Osak. Eunice, with Felicia in her arms, walked into the kitchen and opened a double-door refrigerator, from where she retrieved a gallon of juice and poured out a glass for Osak. She also made him a turkey sandwich. "Ingrid returns on Monday night, right?" she asked. "Yes, I'm expecting her back on Monday evening," said Osak. "In that case, you can leave Felicia here with me for the rest of the weekend and Monday. You guys can pick her up on Tuesday after work." Osak stayed for about 2 hours, then excused himself to leave. "I'll see you guys on Tuesday," said Eunice, as Osak said his goodbyes. "Certainly. Thanks for the sandwich, Miss Eunice. Goodbye." Osak arrived home about an hour later. He was all by himself in the house for another day, until Ingrid's return. He thought about holding up on the plan Uzukwu had shared with him earlier, and there was no better time to do it than now, with all the time in the world in his hands, with no one around as a distraction. But after thinking deeply about it, he decided to abandon the plan. He would ignore whatever mysterious revelations had been conveyed in the dream and the phantasmagoric image during his shave. He figured diving into his work would help to erode the scary images in his subconscious about the old woman. There was a lot of work he brought home with him for the weekend anyway. End of chapter 4.